Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone across the globe joining us today. This is Bridget from Acquia. Today's webinar is Nice Ferrari, but who can drive it? Bridging the gap between IT and marketing, with Josh Hochwater from Genuine, Aaron Voiles from Baxter, and Ryan Bikini from Acquia. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any audio issues, please send them in the Q&A tab and I will assist you. If you have any questions for the presenters, please submit them in the Q&A tab as well, and they will answer them at the end of the presentation. Slides and the recording of this webinar will be posted to acquia.com and also sent to you via email within the next few days. And without further ado, I will pass it over to Josh.
Thank you, Bridget. Hi, everybody. My name is Josh Hochwater. I am head of strategic partnerships for Genuine, responsible for agency growth and forging client relationships with some of our key accounts.
Good morning, everyone. Aaron Voiles from Baxter Healthcare. I'm a senior manager in our digital communications team.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Ryan Bikini from Acquia. I'm the director of product marketing for our Drupal cloud, and we're excited to be with you today. So thanks for hopping on with us. So before we get started in some of the details of our webinar for today and hearing Baxter and Genuine's story, we wanted to start with a few market trends that were impacting Baxter, as well as probably many of you on the line today as it relates to managing a portfolio of digital properties. And so the first one that we wanted to highlight, especially in the new COVID environment, is that, and even over the course of the last few years, is there's been a tremendous amount of consolidation. There's been mega mergers, which you can see here, we've listed on the right, as well as consolidation across industries that might not be as well known or within smaller companies. And that's probably going to continue to happen over the course of the next 18 to 24 months, as some companies will thrive and some companies will go out of business. And why it matters is because for many digital leaders, what they're experiencing is that they are going from managing a single digital property to a handful of digital properties to a portfolio of digital properties, which could be tens, hundreds, or even thousands, depending on how those brands and their digital infrastructure is set up. And with that, there's an increase in compliance. With more business being done online, with the vast amount of customer data, there's new regulation that's creating complexity for digital marketing leaders. So whether it's well-known regulation like the GDPR, California Consumer Privacy Act, or even consumer privacy legislation that's being introduced in specific states that you might not know about, it's becoming widespread. And why that matters for digital marketing leaders is that the cost of non-compliant sites is extremely high. So if a site is not GDPR compliant, that can have a meaningful impact in terms of fines that will directly impact the bottom line, but it also impacts the brand. And where more and more of the buying cycle is taking place online, from evaluation all the way through to purchase, the risk of non-compliant sites is a real challenge in terms of creating a meaningful connection and moving that customer or prospect down the buying cycle. In terms of digital properties and the number of digital experiences that most organizations are creating, it continues to grow. So the average number of digital properties is 200 for Fortune 1000 organizations. When we classify digital properties here, this could be anything from the corporate.com to a microsite, a customer portal, an experience on an emerging channel like a voice or conversational interface. And so it's that collection of digital properties across the organization that they're trying to manage. And why it matters is there's no sign of this slowing down. In some cases, organizations are creating kind of a mega brand and sub brands underneath it, but the complexity that's going to go with that, as well as the volume of content and number of stakeholders who are going to touch digital experiences, is not shrinking. And in many cases, you'll hear some of this from Aaron today, but IT leaders have a tremendous amount of pressure to deliver. They're not getting more resources. They're just being asked to work smarter and figure out ways to adapt in this ever-changing, digital landscape. And one of the challenges that we continue to hear from folks like Aaron and agency leaders like Josh is that the expectations for building and managing, enhancing these sites is getting higher and higher. And the reason for that is because many of the non-technical users or business users are using simple tools in their day-to-day lives, whether it's a Wix or a Squarespace, and they're expecting that same kind of ease of use and speed and agility when they're in a business context. And they don't understand all the complexity and nuances behind the scenes, which makes it a pretty big challenge to bridge that gap. And so IT is trying to figure out how to keep business users from going rogue and aligning everyone on the expectations and the reasons around why you need an enterprise solution, and some of the consumer site building tools aren't viable within a larger organization. And so you put all this together, and the result is often for organizations, especially multi-brand conglomerates, is this idea of site sprawl. So you have multiple sites, you have multiple teams, you have multiple regions, you have multiple platforms, and it creates a mess. So what the end result is, nobody gets their content live fast enough. The investment across all the teams and properties and technology that are running sites on their own, you're not getting the economies of scale. There's not the governance in place to make sure that, if you're looking at a brand in the US and then you look at their site in the UK, that it's the same experience. And then you often have multiple partners, if you don't have some form of standardization, who are all kind of vying to help the different teams with their own cost model, which doesn't create efficiency across the organization. And the expectation that's coming from the business and customers just isn't getting met. And so more organizations are looking at, how do we standardize while giving each of the teams what they need and enabling growth. So it's a tricky challenge to try to embark and challenge and opportunity to embark on, but there is some hope, and we're excited to share the story of Baxter and Genuine in terms of how they've taken on this challenge and they're on the other side. So I guess in every successful organization that we've seen who have standardized and given the business what they needed, there was really three components. There, at the heart of it was the client, who understood the nuances of the organization, how to drive change, and what was going on inside the walls of that organization. There was a technology partner that had a solution that was purpose-built to address this challenge and opportunity. And then there was a strategic partner who was guiding that process. And in this case, these were the three players within that equation. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Aaron to tell you a little bit more about the backstory on Baxter, where they were in terms of their digital presence, where they wanted to go, and how they got there alongside with Josh. So Aaron, I'll kick it to you from this point forward.
Great, thanks, Ryan. Before we get too involved into, or too much into the details, I want to tell you a little bit about Baxter initially. If you're not familiar with us, we're a healthcare company. We've got an 85+ year experience with creating products that sustain and save lives. You can find our products in about more than 100 countries. And they range from things for renal care, specifically dialysis, if you're having troubles with kidneys, to surgical products that are used in hospital ERs. And then after you're out of surgery, we have products that help deliver medications and nutrition to you if you can't take them, as a pill form or swallow them. So our products help treat more than 60 million people annually, and it's particularly relevant right now with COVID-19. Although we're not creating any vaccines, what we found is people that get the serious form of COVID-19 often have renal failure during the process, and so our products are helping in that respect. Next slide, please. So to get an idea of where we're at now, you have to understand a little bit where we came from. And this picture was kind of designed to show a mess, and it was a little bit of a mess. We had about 250 sites across some different CMSs and different platforms. As depicted on this slide, they were all different shapes and sizes. We didn't have a consistent marketing approach to these things. And our teams that were setting these up, if they were a product site or a therapy site, would often work with an agency on their own and fund these sorts of things. And as a result, each site it said Baxter on it, but it was very different from a navigation standpoint, from a branding standpoint. And the other interesting thing is none of the sites were really connected. There was no call to action from one site to the next. These were just a collection of disparate sites. They weren't really part of an ecosystem. And layered on top of that, we have challenges with, we're a healthcare company, so it is highly regulated. And if you're in the financial sector or in energy, you're probably very familiar with this. But we have to answer to ministries of health all over the globe, including the FDA in the US. And when you couple that with data security and privacy, as Ryan mentioned earlier, and even down to the standpoint of being inclusive on the sites for people with disabilities, we are a healthcare company, so our sites should be accessible. All of these create a very complex environment, and unfortunately, each one of these sites handled them a little bit differently, and we're building these all kind of independently from the ground up. But the one thing, the one catalyst that started the change for us was a move from a branding perspective. All of these things were kind of their own brand, and so Baxter could have been considered a house of brands at that point. But the notion was coming down from our executive teams that we want to change that. We want to be a branded house or a master brand. And this wasn't just with our websites. This was across all aspects of the company, including our product labeling, our print material, our marketing collateral, even down to our internal processes and documentation that we used internally. Next slide, please. So what we settled on was to do a lot of homework first. And before we even started talking about the technology here, there was a lot of thought put into how we want to organize our digital presence. And instead of having a collection of corporate sites, which are all slightly different, and product sites and therapy sites and services sites, we started to group these things together and to coalesce these individual product sites and therapy sites into buckets, so to speak. So corporate sites being one of them, anything that talks about a Baxter product was thrown or was destined for a product portfolio site rather than having a standalone site. Our therapy sites needed to have a consistent look and feel to them for patients because, they're patient-facing. We want to present a reassuring brand for people that are looking for answers to the conditions that they have. And then finally, the services sites are more patient-focused and in providing services to them once they've been diagnosed and prescribed a treatment. So for instance, in this case, a services site would be if you are a renal patient and are well enough to travel or go on a vacation, how do you handle your dialysis requirements if you are going to another state or another country? And these services sites help you get those products, no matter where if you're at home or whatever your destination is. So to kind of organize that, we looked at Site Factory from Acquia, consolidated a lot of those 250 sites down into about 70 consolidated product sites, corporate sites, and therapy sites. We worked with Genuine to create 2 install profiles, one for corporate sites, which presented our corporate brand, and then one for commercial. And the commercial sites talk about products and therapies. But in order to distinguish between those, we layered on a couple of different skins or themes that allowed us to do slight tweaks to the site to either signify a product site or a therapy site. And then on top of that, it's not, there are other things besides Acquia that we had to consider as part of this source code management. We didn't do source code management before, and now we're operating in a consistent environment. We had to start tracking our code and making sure that we don't break things in the ecosystem as we add enhancements. We layered on caching globally, DNS, web application firewall, and a certificate authority. This year, our biggest focus is privacy integration. GDPR is crazy. I don't claim to understand a lot of the legalese in it, but I know that we're not going to do a great job if left to our own devices on this. So we've integrated a privacy platform into the mix. Translations for us were set out early on. We knew that we're in over 100 countries, so we're going to have a lot of languages that we have to support. Fortunately, the translation partner that we kind of standardize on has a component that works with Drupal, and we were able to integrate that. And then, as most teams, we don't have just a production environment for this, but we have multiple environments for testing and staging things. And so those are all layered in here as well. Next slide, please. So we have this great new thing that we've built. It's very powerful. We have a lot of integrations. And keep in mind, this wasn't all a flip of a switch. This was grown over time. But the one concern we had is that we didn't want to be traditional IT with this and say, here's a platform, marketing teams, go contact your agencies and build some sites, and good luck figuring all of this out. That would have put us right back in the spot that we started in. And the goal here was to provide value. And we took a long, hard look at how do we manage this differently so that we don't end up with a bunch of disparate sites all kind of doing their own thing, that we wanted to provide some consistency. And so this wasn't just an exercise in giving some people some training about how to use this new CMS, that there was a lot of extra thought that has to go into it. We had to talk about processes for onboarding. We had to talk about processes for continually reviewing these sites, because we don't want to just throw them out there and then cross them off of our list and never check up on them again to make sure that they're still in compliance. We had to build teams that didn't exist. And we'll talk about that a little bit too. But you know, nobody said, hey, we're going, Aaron, you go be on this new team. We kind of had to formulate this team out of existing people that were participating in this initiative. And then the real important thing was, don't leave people don't set them adrift and say, here's the thing that you need and go read this manual and figure it out. We wanted to give them the tools to help them operate within the templates that we were building, not just to build their own sites in Drupal. And if you jump to the next slide, I'll kind of go over that. There were 2 things that we wanted to do to kind of control the narrative here. And the first thing that we did is on the right, is we built, out of the templates that we were working on with Genuine, we built what we were calling a white site or a starter kit. And this site is never meant to be published, but it's an example site that we can show marketing teams or their agency partners all of the features and capabilities of our templates. It includes each one of the example page types or content types that we have for a site, and then all of the components that are available on there. And obviously, we're not going to encourage people to put every component that's available on every page on their site, but this gives them the ability to see an example of this, a practical example. And it wasn't just lorem ipsum text on a dummy site. It actually had practical, useful information. If we're trying to showcase the use of a large tile component, we show the size of the picture, and we document it in the site. We show them the type of long form content that goes along with that, how to do a call to action to another page or another site from there, and give them examples of how they would use these things. In addition to that, we had started out with a document to kind of describe our policies and procedures and how all this would work, but we realized that that's not sustainable in the long run because everybody hates to read documents for starting, and it's impossible to manage this and keep it going on a continual basis. So we worked with Genuine to create what's essentially a wiki site, or what we're calling a governance site. And all of that stuff that we put in to our document is now going into this. It's a relatively new addition for us. And what we're finding out is the hardest part of this whole thing is not building the site, but actually writing content that is meaningful for the end user and is in a form that's digestible for them so that they don't get bored and just skip over it. Next slide, please. So speaking of that reuse and that governance, I wanted to focus on an example of where we took those templates and created a therapy site. And the focus here was, particularly around the governance, was reuse. We didn't want, we wanted to make sure that the investment that we're putting into this was reused multiple times, and it wasn't just a one-trick pony that we were putting out there and then doing this again and again. We wanted to make sure that we capitalized on that investment. And the other challenge for this was, we didn't, although we love working with Genuine, we didn't want to depend on them for everything. So the goal here was to give teams and their agency partners a site that they could work with that didn't require any development. It was just add your content and sort of adjust things as you need it, and then launch a site. And this was part of the carrot that we were using in order to get people to sort of adopt this. Was here's the advantages of doing it this way versus the old way. And the old way was you spent a lot of money with an agency partner to start from zero and get to an end state. And here we've done that, the bulk of that heavy lifting for you, and all you really need to do is work with your agency partner to focus on the content. And that was the promise, and this is an example of how we realized that. This is an example of a therapy site, which was written in English with the aid of an agency partner, and they developed the content here. And then it was cloned and used again for release to the UK. Again, the only thing that needed to be done at that point was some tweaking to the language, because the Brits spell things a little differently than we do, so they had to make some adjustments there. But the site on the right is that same site cloned and repurposed for a Malaysian audience. And in Malaysia, there was the challenge with 3 languages. In addition to English, they support native Malay and Chinese. So this is not building a site from the ground up, but it's just tweaking the content, translating it, and adjusting the assets like the videos, which might have featured some English text on them, to support a voiceover for Chinese or native Malay or what have you. So that's the exercise that we're switching to now versus building a site from the ground up. It's more about tweaking an existing structure and then adding content for it. And just to kind of hit this home, one final point is, this is an example of 3 of our sites. The site on the left is a corporate site. The site in the middle is a product site, and the site on the right is a therapy site. And what I've done is done a full screen print of each one of these. And the content is not important. It's important that you see the structures that are reused from site to site to site. So I've highlighted in green the elements and the components on the page that are actually built once and reused multiple times to get a different effect. So at the top, you'll see utility menus and headers with the word mark at the top, a large hero image below that, which can either support a background video or a static image. The part that's about midway through on the left is a thing that we call a small tile, which is a couple sentences of text with an icon and a call to action. It's meant to convey just a quick sentiment or a quick idea and then take you somewhere else. We have media sliders, large tile groups, call to actions, and footers, which were all reused consistently. And then we spent a lot of time after this was developed working with agency partners in our teams, collecting enhancements to these things. Like, you know, they came back to us and said, this is great. I really wish it could do this or this or this. And we've been working to kind of flesh out and give more functionality or more variations of those components over time. So that's sort of a little bit about what we did. And in order to talk about how we did it, I'm going to turn it over to Josh next. And then he's going to go into sort of the process of what we did in order to get there.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, so, you know, I think Aaron spoke really well about the sort of two pieces of this, right? There's the governance piece, which is giving people the process and the guidance, and then there's enablement. And really, in order for a platform to be successful, we really see the need for those things to be, you know, really coupled together, two sides of the same coin, in order to really realize value, right? And so that's really our focus: is how do we enable government, how do we provide governance as well as provide enablement to help realize value, so that that Ferrari is not stuck in the garage, but is actually out there being driven in the world. So when we think about governance, we really think about it as the active and coordinated leadership of a platform's resources and activities. So this is not just you know, do's and don'ts per se, but it's got to be active and coordinated leadership, right? Something that's really forward-leaning and thinking ahead, not just reacting to what do's and don'ts that people might be, how people are using or misusing the platform. So we're thinking about things like team structure. We're thinking about the processes and the decision-making that happens, and the planning and standards that we need to adhere to in order to effectively communicate to our audiences. And we think about governance, really, there's kind of two aspects to it, right? The first piece, and the, you know, really a critical piece, is the listening piece. In order to build a governance framework that's going to be effective in terms of governing a large platform within a complex organization, you've got to understand where people are coming from, what sort of exists in the current state. So things like stakeholder interviews are important, understanding, talking to stakeholders across the organization, understanding the ecosystem that's present, not just the sites, but also any sort of additional technologies in the MarTech stack that might be integrated and how people are using those. And then ultimately, it's really important, of course, to align on what are the actual goals for this platform? What are we trying to accomplish here? So we take all those, and then we think about how do we put something into action, right? That's really where we're starting to define processes and tasks. What are the jobs to be done on the platform, and how do we enable those? We want to focus a lot on a team structure. As Aaron pointed out, there wasn't a team in place per se. There was a collection of individuals who had some purview or some responsibilities related to the platform, but really starting to define a team structure helps ensure that people know who to go to and when and where in order to effectively, you know, move the platform forward. And then at the sort of the final piece has been identifying and socializing those standards and that guidance on how to use it. So when you think about platform governances, again, it's really a system that's actively managed through concerted leadership and execution. So those are the activities. And then it's really being enabled with the right processes, tools, budgets. Those are your resources, right? So we want to think about those two pieces of resources and activities really working together to successfully move a platform forward, right? Resources really enable and direct the activities. When we think about how to define a platform governance framework, we really start with the who and the how, right? We're really focused on the two critical resources. Those are the people and the processes. So these are really where we're thinking about who is managing the platform, people like Aaron and many of his colleagues, how are they managing it, and what are the challenges that we are or we need to solve for in order to effectively, manage and move the business forward within the platform. And a big piece of understanding those people and processes are what are the organizational structures and what are the organizational dynamics, because business readiness is such a critical piece of any sort of platform adoption, right? And so we really want to focus when we talk about the people and processes how is the organization structured, and what are sort of the things that we need to understand about how the organization works together. In the case of Baxter, you've got sort of the corporate and the commercial, and sometimes those things are I wouldn't say they're in conflict, but they're not always in lockstep either, right? So we have to make sure we're mindful of those pieces. And obviously we want to think about then the business requirements for the platform as part of this process. Once we've sort of collected that, and really dug into the people and the processes, then we start to map that back to what are all the things that need to be sort of addressed? What are the topics that we need to discuss, right? So we want to define ownership of those topics. We want to understand subject matter skills or subject matter expertise and where the gaps might be. And ultimately, this serves as sort of the content model that Aaron pointed to, right? That really guides the governance model. You'll see here, this is just sort of an example, but it gives you a sense of kind of the different buckets of topics that might be included in a governance framework. Things, obviously, the team structure and how that works is really important. Details about the technology, the content authoring experience, and then a lot of other policies that might be, essential only to the digital platform, but also things that might impact it, things like brand guidelines, et cetera. Once we sort of had that outlined, then we move into, deeper into the team structure, right? So again, we want to provide a structure that provides, strong buy-in, guidance, execution capabilities, but based on how the enterprise actually operates, right? So that's where that listening phase really becomes important. It's got to be a structure that is mapped to the organization. This, again, is not a one-size-fits-all. This is very much a tailored to an individual organization. But I think the key aspects of aligning and customizing the team are, again, focusing on the organization, the business structure. What are the different functions and processes that are at play here? So in the case of Baxter, for example, you've got a whole regulatory process around AdProm, what they call AdProm. So really reviewing the communications before they're published to ensure that they comply with all those Ministry of Health guidelines. And then really digging into core management tasks. Who are those users? What skills do they need to have? And then ultimately, what resources are actually available, right? Some of this is not necessarily these people's full-time job. So let's make sure that we build a team structure and a model and a framework that doesn't pile it on to one individual who frankly only has about 10% of their time allocated to this particular task. And so when we do that, again, as Aaron pointed out, once we've sort of defined it, then we publish it, and then socialize it, right? So as Aaron mentioned, we started with a document and then have now moved to a community and a governance website. So Aaron here has a Slack, kind of a screenshot of Slack, just to give you a sense that there is a community as well that Aaron is actively managing with the team, and people are submitting questions, submitting comments on things that they're using and how they've, how they're actually leveraging the platform. But so we've got this framework in place, and we have a team that's structured, that is empowered to move the platform forward. But we've really only solved half the problem at this point, as Aaron pointed out. We've essentially taken care of, the stick, or let's call it the velvet hammer, because it's not so heavy-handed. But we also need to think about, as Aaron pointed out, the carrot piece too, right? And the carrot piece to us is really about enablement. So this is more than just evangelizing a platform, right? This is not just singing the praises of what the platform can or should do. It's really about assembling a set of tools and systems and processes and resources that actually give users the means to effectively utilize the platform and ensure its ongoing operation. Again, if the car is stuck in the garage, if the Ferrari is stuck in the garage, that's a big waste of money in this case, right? So we want to make sure that, even when an organization is bought in on the vision and the promise, there's often still a gap there in terms of actually realizing the value of what the platform provides. So we really focus then on enablement. Traditionally, enablement methods have been, some of the things you see here, right? Business user training, might be some CMS training, whether that's one-on-one or some sort of webinar. There's probably documentation, maybe with some screenshots that tell you how and where to do things. You might even have a webinar, a town hall, or some sort of roadshow where you really go around and sort of talk through, what's there. And you probably have an intranet or something that really houses a lot of resources. And we think that these can all be very useful tools. But the problem is that they're still largely theoretical, right? Or they put a significant amount of strain on product owners like Aaron and their resources to continue to support and enable these things. Especially in the context of Site Factory, Site Factory is really designed to allow you to choose the install profile, clone a site, configure it, and add content. But when in the context of a platform like this, if you use that model, when it comes to actually getting started with a new site, typically you're still left with a blank Drupal site with nothing enabled, right? And that can be very crippling for non-technical users. So as Aaron pointed out, we found success with a slightly different approach that we call white sites, or we call starter kits. So we think of a starter kit as really a preset collection of templates, components, and features that make up a sort of typical use case for a marketer or brand team in the context of their business. So there's two key aspects to a starter kit. One is that it's opinionated. And what we mean by that is we're not just telling you what components exist. We're telling you what they should be used for and how, right? As Aaron pointed out, it's not a bunch of lorem ipsum in these components. It is actually outlining this component should be used here and should contain this many characters, etc. And the other piece that's, again, very important as it comes to site building is contextual, right? So we're also including not only the guidance around when and how to use a component, but we're actually showing it in the context of the other components or features that are in the platform. So to say, these things can be used in tandem, or in some cases, we don't recommend that you use these things together in tandem. And so when we do, what we found that when we do that is it gives users enough direction and to actually start to imagine what their content could look like in the site. It gives them the opportunity to really focus on building content and creating the experiences they want to create, rather than sort of getting bogged down with what particular method we need to use to display the content. So I wanted to give you a little insight into how we sort of think about creating starter kits, because as Aaron pointed out, we started down the path of just enabling these sites and these install profiles, and really what emerged was the need to create something more cohesive in terms of a starter kit that would enable more folks to leverage what was there. So what we did then is really, first and foremost, we started with an inventory, right? We started thinking about what functional, what experience, what design and content needs exist kind of across the organization, both in the terms of the sites that were already on the platform, so understanding what was already there, but also where those gaps might be. And then what we want to make sure that we do is really distill it down to the lowest common denominator. We might see across, the sites on the platform and other sites that there are a host of different cards for content, but realistically, could they all be distilled into a single sort of underlying card component that then could be themed to look differently? So that's really our approach, is first and foremost to map out what's there and prioritize, then understand as this sort of do this gap analysis of what already exists within the platform and where we might need to focus some development effort to build out. And in part of that, we want to understand, is there something that we can leverage to extend what's already there? Or is it really a need that's so unique that it actually requires something to be created and that new? And then from there, we reprioritize again, because we want to look at that in the context of, all right, we understood all these needs. Now we've assessed against what's there and where we might have to build that new. And let's look at, based on budgets and timings and things like that, we may need to reprioritize. And then it's really a process then of abstracting and implementing, right? So we're going to either create a new profile if we need to, or in cases of it, as Aaron pointed out, we've extended the profile, the commercial profile, to support more themes and more variations. and we want to, as much as possible, reuse what already exists. We like to use the concept of stay dry, so do not repeat yourself. The other piece that's really important is that we can phase this out, right? So based on business priority, this is not something that, hey, we can't launch the site until, or this new profile or this new starter kit until all the things are done. I think it's more about what can we do to enable folks now, and what can we do to, what do we need to put off until budgets or resources are in line, and then we can prioritize those things. And a critical piece of this is that every starter kit, every element that we create needs to make sure we integrate it back into all of the platform processes around build, around QA, around UAT, so that this, otherwise you start to get these little snowflakes out there still. So we want to make sure that we're always keeping those in line. And so the result, you can see here some screenshots of different ways that we've articulated this, right? So we're creating, we're giving guidance on, kind of every aspect, how to use the navigation, how to use different components. And ultimately, we find that it's reduced, I think, the strain on people like Aaron to have to, basically build the site for them. So the whole notion of we're now teaching people to fish, right? Versus cooking them a fish or catching it for them. I think that's what's really exciting about what Site Factory offers, and something that we've been able to leverage really effectively. So I'm going to hand it over to Ryan to talk to you a little bit more about the rest of the Acquia product suite, just in terms of how else it can enable this further.
Yeah, and thanks, Josh and Aaron. Just an amazing story. I mean, just a really innovative approach, how you guys thought about managing this portfolio and some of the tricks of the trade for folks who are trying to get started on the journey that you've successfully been on. Just a quick kind of overview of some of the solutions that Acquia provides. What you heard about today was the foundation in many ways in Acquia Cloud Site Factory. That is the tool to help companies like Baxter manage a portfolio of digital properties effectively, and create the center of excellence that, Aaron and Josh have kind of talked through today. In terms of organizations, as they look to evolve their experience, Acquia has a variety of solutions. So once you have the content up and governed and deployed and it's all on brand, then often the next step, and some of the things that we're discussing with Baxter and Genuine is, how do you make that content personalized? How do you allow maybe more of the marketers within the organization to play an active role in making minor changes while having some of the guidelines that have been set forth? If some of the regions want to go to a multi-experience, so instead of just having a .com, they want to have an experience that lives on a conversational interface or digital signage. And so Acquia has tools to take an organization like Baxter from the foundation and creating great content experiences to evolve them to personalized multi-channel experiences at the right phase in their journey. And one of the things I think that I don't want to speak out of turn for Aaron, but that his team appreciated is that they could start with what they needed and then add, as they see fit and as the organization was ready. So that's one of the beauties of the Acquia Cloud, is that whether it's the Drupal or marketing cloud components, is that you have the opportunity to evolve your digital experience at the pace that you see fit. But just know, as you think about your overarching experience, that Acquia has a complete set of solutions, whether it's to set the foundation or to create some of the really advanced experiences that you might be marching towards. So with that, Josh, I think that concludes our content for today. We have about 15 minutes for Q&A, so I will pass it over to Bridget, who is our moderator, to take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aaron, Josh, and Ryan. And if you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A tab, and we'll get those answered. So first question, how do you get started with all the internal politics and opinions? I think this is more directed towards Aaron, but Josh and Ryan, feel free to add anything in too.
That's a great question. It was really hard to begin with. First of all, we're making this change, and I mentioned before that we had a required change to branding, and so that kind of was our foot in the door, so to speak, in order to have the conversation. But the next big challenging thing is, how do we get people to listen to us? We were not given any authority to start this process. There was no executive that said, you must listen to this team and follow their rules for creating a website. So we went with the approach to make this more of, to show them the advantages of going this way versus, the mandate. They knew that we had to do this branding change in the background, but we came to them with an option to make that easier. And it was, you've got 10 different sites out there, all branded differently, and now you've been given the charge to make them all kind of consistent. We come in and say, hey, we've got a way to make that easier for you so you don't have to think about it. And oh yeah, we're going to save you time and we're going to save you money with your agencies when developing new sites. And so, you can't just talk about this and give them lip service. You have to show them something. And that's where the white site came in. And when we can kind of show them how quickly this could be engineered and set up, then it took off a little bit faster than what we were expecting. We also find somebody that is an ally too. That's another big thing. People are really big at trying to outdo each other. And we found out this is especially true with marketing teams. They all want the site that looks better than this other team over here. And they want to do it fast and they want it to look like the latest and greatest thing. So find a team that you can partner with that is, more of an ally, get them going first and then use them as a showcase to kind of make everybody else jealous, and then they all sort of follow suit. That was the other thing that we learned early on too, that to find those bright spots or those teams that you can work with and get a couple successes out of the way.
I don't think there's anything I could add to that, Aaron.
It's not an easy process by any stretch, but you just have to kind of be creative. And we found out we catch more flies with honey than we did, with vinegar. So, showing them the advantages is probably your best option.
Awesome. So kind of on that, what surprised you most about this process?
Just to dovetail on that is that once we got a couple successes underway, the thing that surprised me the most is the response that we wanted, that people wanted to join. And it was exactly opposite. I thought this was going to be like, pulling teeth. Nobody wanted to do it. That's what I was expecting. But once we showed the benefits of this and kind of showed how quickly a site could be stood up in the proper branding, people were anxious to follow suit. We had a lot of response back. Then the hard part was managing that demand. And then everybody thought, oh, this is great, but it would be better if it could do this and this and this and this. And then the next step is, trying to manage that onslaught of enhancement requests and things like that. Mm-hmm. But at least it's a good problem to have. It wasn't nobody coming. It was a lot of people coming and a lot of change, but we just had to, work hard to manage all of that.
Mm-hmm. Were there any other additional challenges, or was that kind of it?
No, I have a whole laundry list of challenges. Lately, it's, I mentioned before, we're highly regulated. And one of the challenging parts for us is if somebody wants to make a change to a product site, they can't just go and update a paragraph on a page. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes in order to make sure that that statement is not subjective, that it's accurate, that it's backed up by facts. I mean, we're dealing with products that can affect people's lives, for the positive, but also for the negative. So we have to be very careful with that. And dealing with inconsistencies and regulatory practices or, different policies from country to country to country has been a huge challenge. The other thing is being in so many countries with so many languages, translations are a challenge, not just, for me, but for anybody that's creating websites. Translations are just notoriously difficult, and making sure that they read right and that it's easy for someone to create a translation across the board, and then allowing or giving people opportunity to switch their language on the fly. All of this is really challenging, and I think that's another one that we face on an ongoing basis, is all of the regulatory requirements and all of the challenges with being global and multilingual.
Thanks for that, Aaron. I guess, Josh, I know you were involved in kind of Aaron's partner in the day-to-day and helping him build out this strategy. Is there anything that you would add in terms of what surprised you about Baxter's situation and maybe how it's different? And then maybe common challenges kind of along the same lines.
I can predict that Josh is going to say they're really slow at making decisions.
Hey, you got regulation you can fall back on.
Right.
That's right. That's right. No, I think, I mean, to kind of echo Aaron's surprise, I think, when we've done this with other organizations, the adoption challenge has been more significant, right? I think we've encountered, especially without that sort of clear mandate from the top that says, you must come over, you must do this thing. In other organizations, we've encountered a lot more people sort of wanting to stay with their sort of, their own, whatever rogue site they have, or their rogues, and work with their agency. And so I think that did surprise us, especially, we kept pushing Aaron we need this organizational mandate. It's the only way it's going to happen. And it's like, no, we just did the carrot approach, and it was really effective. So I think that was surprising. And I think that's, I guess that sort of speaks to the common challenges too. I think adoption is a challenge in the sense that, again, I've talked about the promise of Site Factory being clone, configure, add content. Well, there's a fair amount of work that needs to be done to reach maturity with the platform where it can actually sort of live up to that promise. And I think one of the challenges we encounter when we've done this with a number of clients is just there's an impatience to that value realization. You want to be able to realize that promise right away, but you've got to do the hard work of understanding the platform, and then the governance, and then the enablement, and then that's when it really can sing. And people, to the point where Baxter now really has a center of excellence that doesn't require us to be significantly involved. We're really helping, focused on enhancements to the platform, providing some consultation and strategic guidance, but we're not really in the day-to-day of managing sites and building out net new sites.
Yeah, and what I love about that, Josh, is that there's the vision to empower the client, but at the same time, I love how you guys work together across all those phases, and you came up with innovative ideas, especially the starter kits and white sites. What I've seen in looking at hundreds of client implementations across Site Factory is that you guys took it to the next level for your business partners, and you really thought about together being a partner to the end users and helping them make the gap. You did all the work behind the scenes, and then finally got them to a place that says, we've even taken it one step further. It's visual. You can see what it would look like. You just need to put content in there. And I applaud both of you guys for, taking it to the next level in terms of just getting the folks within your organization to make it easy to adopt the platform. So that was, I see that as a critical step, but that requires a partner and a client who are going to work hard together, and take some of your guidance from a partner who can really think through some of the nuances given your experience. Because I know your team at Genuine has done a lot of multi-brand, multi-site implementation. So that I can see how your experience came through with Aaron and his group there, and Aaron's, just strategic vision in terms of where you're trying to go. So that's great. So Bridget, I don't know if there are other questions that you wanted to propose. I actually had one for Aaron, but
yeah, no, go ahead.
There might be a few more.
There's one more that I wanted to ask, which was kind of what you guys were just talking about was, what were your requirements when selecting a partner and a technology provider to help with this project. So what was important to you? I think you were saying that a little bit before.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, we were really looking for somebody that could come to us with ideas and strategy. You know, there are a lot of people that will say, here, use this and put it in place and you'll be fine. But you're seeing now that the vast majority of there's a small portion of this which is actually setting up the technology. The other part, which has nothing to do with technology at all, is more about the strategy, the governance, and how you communicate this out and drive adoption. And that, for me, was a real requirement in finding a partner. And we'd been down that road before, where we worked with integrators to set up a platform, and you saw where we came from, so you know how that ended up. There was no strategy, and there was no governance, and there was no real significant guidance on this, or thought about what to do next, and didn't want to do that again. So we made a conscious effort to make sure that we looked for partners that had some strategic vision and could help us figure this out, because being a team that was basically cobbled together, we didn't have all the answers that we needed. We had some ideas of where we wanted to be, but didn't know, you know, the details on how to get there.
Great, thanks for that, Aaron. It looks like we have time for one more question. So the question that has come up in a few different variations in the chat is, there was a slide that you showed, Aaron, about the community and the Slack community. And there's, you know, would love to get a sense of how you fostered that community.
Sure.
And how that came, you know, and what your thought process there was. So you had a group of ambassadors kind of innovating as well as promoting the vision. So can you talk a little bit about the community?
Yeah, and I don't want to give you the impression that we were using Slack. Slack was an example of a community, but you know, use your favorite community tool. We're not promoting one or versus the other, but what we did is we set this out, and as we launched a website, we started inviting the stakeholders to the site and said, hey, look, here's your community where you can start to ask questions. And was really struggling with this because I was worried that this was just going to turn into a glorified help desk. And at least initially, it started out to be that way a little bit. There were a lot of questions about, how do I do this? How do I do this? And, you know, there was a lot of answering of those sorts of questions. But then as we started to invite more stakeholders and open the doors to the agency partners that they were using too, so we're all contributing into this community at the same time. It's we're seeing requests now for enhancements. Hey, wouldn't it be great to do this now, or this? And it's a huge forum for announcements. We're making some branding changes to the themes that Josh kind of alluded to. What better way to communicate this out with really good instructions, you know, through a community? And if they miss reading it, we know in the back of our minds that they're going to get an email about this because they missed it. The community tool that we use is really good about, you know, following up with an email. So from that perspective, it's become a really nice communication tool too, in addition to collaboration.
Awesome.
Thank you, Aaron, for that.
Yeah, thank you. That's all we have time for today. So thank you again, Aaron, Ryan, and Josh. And thank you all for attending our webinar today. As I said previously, the slides and the recording of this webinar will be posted to acquia.com and also sent to you via email within the next few days. And if you have any additional questions, please send them to marketing@theacquiateam.com. Thank you and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.